All right, so now that we have our local machine up and running with Git, and maybe if we're on Windows, we even installed GitHub for desktop, we're ready to create our first local Git repository. So we're creating this locally, which means on our machine. And the first thing you have to sort of wrap your head around when you work with Git and GitHub is that you're going to have a local repository and you're going to have a remote repository. And we call the remote repository origin. We call it origin. And both repositories, when you first get started with Git, are going to be on the master branch. Eventually, you could have other branches, and you could say, okay, here's the master branch. I'm going to fork off from master and work on some other code, and then if it looks good, when I'm done with it, I'll say, hey, this is great. Let's merge that branch back into the master branch. Okay, so the main concept here is you're creating a local Git repository. There will be a remote Git repository. The remote Git repository is known as origin. That's the origin from which everybody's going to be getting their code and synchronizing their code. It's the origin. So local and origin, and they're both going to be on branch master when you get started. And so we're doing a local Git repository, branch master, and we're doing a remote Git repository. It's on GitHub. And so I just say remote GitHub repository. And that's the origin, and it will also be on branch master. So that term right there, origin master, or just master, that confuses people at first. And we'll see that as you start working with Git. But now you know origin is the origin, and they're on branch master, so you understand those. All right, so our process, what we're going to do, and I'm doing this quick because there's a lot of information to cover. You can watch the video again, but I'm doing it quick because I just want to give you the information, download it from my head to your head. So watch the video again, or 2 times or 3 times if you need it. So the process we're going to do is we're going to create a folder. That folder should be the exact same name as the folder repo that we use up on GitHub, right? So the origin. So we're going to create a folder, and then we're going to add a .gitignore file to it. The .gitignore file is a special file that Git looks for, and it ignores things that you've put into it. So I can say, hey, ignore everything in this directory. If I have some development assets I don't want to be uploaded to GitHub, like Photoshop files and things like that, I could say, hey, ignore that entire directory. Right, so we'll add a .gitignore file, and then at the terminal we're going to create a Git repo, and to do that we use git init. So all of our commands start with git, G-I-T, and then once we've created our Git repo with git init, we will get the status, and it'll say, hey, there's been a change. You've added this .gitignore file. I've noticed, I've just started, and I've noticed that this is in here. So we will then add that file to the staging area. And what is a staging area? Let's say I'm working in my repository, my folder, and I've made a bunch of changes to cat files, just kitty cats, and I've made a bunch of changes to dog files. And so here are all these files that have been changed. And when I do a Git status, it says, hey, all these files have been changed. Well, I don't want to commit those changes all together because some of them are about the cat and some of them are about the dog. I would rather separate those commits. So if I ever need to go back and look oh, what did we do to the dog files? I could see, well, there were all the dog file changes. So to separate those, I then say, okay, Git add all of the cat files. So I could add all the cat files. Now commit those. And so that would be Git add, and I'd specify the cat files instead of all, which is everything. And then I'd commit it, and I'd say, here are the changes to the cat files. And then I would add the dog files to the staging area, the staging index. So I'd say git add dogs, all the dog files, and I'd name those files. And then I'd say git commit, here are all the dog file changes. So the commits are I'm committing changes to the project. And then you could always go back and look at those commits and see what the message was and what happened. And so sometimes when we have a bunch of files of different types, we want to group them. So we put them in groups to a staging area, and then we commit them. That's how that works. Like I said, there's some information to cover in this video. So git init, git status, git add, -- all, git commit, my first commit, and then git log, see it. That's the process. If you know all this, obviously, go on to the next video. Cool. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a folder. I am in my user account. The folder I'm going to create is going to be the same folder that I'm eventually going to use for my remote GitHub repository. So I'm going to come in here and just grab the name of that repo. And if you're working at home, you could create your own. Oh, I got to right click and choose paste. Create your own repo, whatever name you want. Make dir copy paste. There we go. So now if I do an ls-la, ooh, I don't want to see all that. Now if I do an ls, I should have HTML CSS bootcamp. So the next thing I'm going to do is clear that out, and I'm going to change directory and go into my HTML CSS bootcamp. So it's a good idea. This is a takeaway. It's a great idea to always name your repo on GitHub the same as your folder on your local computer. So next thing I want to do is add a git ignore file. So to get that git ignore file, I want you to go to GitHub and go to just go to my Golang web repo. Actually, it'll be in HTML CSS bootcamp by the time you watch this video. But since it's not there yet, I'm going to go to my Golang web repo. I'm going to download this. So download zip. So that is downloading. Cool. And now that it's downloaded, I'm going to open it. And I could go inside here. And because I've gone into view options, change folder search options, and in view, I've taken the check mark off of hide extensions for known file types. I also want to make sure show hidden files, folders, and drives is selected. So when both of those things are done, I'll be able to scroll down and see there's my .gitignore file. So I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go to C, Users, Todd Recording PC, HTML, CSS, and I'm going to paste that right there. And I could come back over to my terminal, so close that, and I don't need this anymore. And I could do an ls-la, and I have my .gitignore file. If you want to see what's in the .gitignore file, let me just clear all this out, and then cat.git. You can see here's the different stuff that's in there. And one of the things it's going to hide is everything in a hidden folder. Anything that starts with a dot is a hidden folder. It's going to hide everything in a hidden folder called .idea, which comes from JetBrains. So when WebStorm makes changes, when you make changes to your file, WebStorm's going to keep track of all that, kind of like its own Git repository. And I don't want to commit those files every time that I'm working. So I want to make sure that that is ignored. So if you're working with WebStorm, you absolutely want to make sure that that's ignored. And a little bit further down here on the list, you can see I'm ignoring some MP4s and OGG files. These are commented out, the little pound signs, that's a comment out. And so if I wanted to ignore all files, that's what the star is, that end with MP4, or all files that end with this extension, I would take that comment right there out. And so those are comments, the pound signs. So that's all the stuff that's being ignored in this .gitignore. And you could go through and clean that up and get rid of stuff or add stuff. But if you're using WebStorm, you absolutely want all of that. All right. So I've got my gitignore file. Now I need to do a git init. So I'm going to do an ls-la again. And you can see this is what's in there. And now I'm going to do a git init, and this is the magic command that makes this a Git repo. So when I do that, it's going to add this hidden .git file, right, or folder, hidden .git folder. So that's been added. That's cool. So this is now a Git repo. So I could do, I'm just going to clear out, I could do a Git Status, and it tells me, hey, there's an untracked file. I'm not tracking this yet. What do you want to do with it? I'm going to do a Git Add, and if I wanted to, I could just add that file name. But you'll sometimes see people do this, git add dot, and you'll sometimes see people do this, git add -- all. What's the difference? Well, git add dot gitignore is going to add just that one file to the staging index, or git add dot will add everything from where I'm at downwards that's changed to the staging index. So if I was in a subfolder, it would add everything from the subfolder downwards, through that folder, but it wouldn't add things that were above me. Git add -- all adds everything that's changed in this folder, no matter where you're at in that folder structure. So when you're working at the command line, you always have to be aware of what folder are you in. Anyhow, I always use git add -- all like 99% of the time. So now if I do a git status, you'll notice it went from an untracked file showing it to me in red to, hey, here's your initial commit, changes to be committed. There's a new file, git ignore. So that's green. So that's now staged. That's in the staging area, the staging index. So I'm going to clear that out, and I'm just going to add a commit message. And so adds.gitignore file is my commit message. It's my first commit. So I commit that, and it says, great, this file, has had some changes. It went from line feed to replaced by carriage return line fee. And this is like Windows, how they do returns, and this is like Unix. So that was one of the settings we selected when we installed Git. And the file has changed. There's 51 insertions. Cool. And I could do finally a git log. Let me first just clear all this out. And git log shows me a log of all of my commits. And so here's the commit ID, and here's the person who made the commit, and here's the date at which the commit was made and the time. Cool, it's 10. And it adds the git ignore file. That was my commit message. So there's my commit. And as I continue to make commits and work on a project, I'll be able to do git log and see who made a change and when they made it and what the change was by their little message here. So that's how you get a local Git repository up and running. These commands here, you only use this one once, the first time you initialize a Git repository, but then Git Status, Git Add -- all, Git Commit, your first commit, that's like your bread and butter for GitHub. So just using those commands, that's your bread and butter. If this went too fast for you, watch this video again, or watch it 3 times or 4 times, and then go through this process a couple of times. Create a folder, right? Let me just see where I'm at here. Create a folder, and then inside that folder, add the .gitignore file, and then use git init to make it a Git repo to initialize the Git repository, and then do the Git Status, Git Add, Git Commit to commit your first change. And do that a couple of times, then remove recursively with force the folder and do it again. And if you've done that 3 or 4 times, you'll be like, okay, I see how it's working. At least for me, I'm a total kinesthetic learner, and it'll reinforce for you how it's working. If you've got it just by watching this, great, good job. And in the next video, we're going to see how to connect our local Git repository, right, on branch master to our remote Git repository up there on GitHub. So we'll see how to do that in the next video.